Thank you, everybody. Good morning for being here today for this event entitled Thinking with Sections and Models. Why do we talk about sections and models? Because landscape architects mostly rely on maps or plans at various levels of scales to represent ideas and proposals. And the horizontal dimension of the landscape seems to be more significant than the vertical one for representing spatial, temporal relationships. There is instead a third dimension that plays a crucial role in landscape architecture, one that is useful for modeling the terrain, understanding and shaping water and soil dynamics, designing visual perspectives, as well as conceptually, materially, and emotionally drafting, co-designing, and verifying a project with different stakeholders. So this conference addresses sections and models as tool for exploration, analysis, synthesis, and design in the field of landscape architecture and planning, from the micro scale to the territorial one. They are really a very much important part of the design for landscape architects. To do so, we invited three major main prominent speakers: Günter Vogt, Herbert Dreistriel, and Michel Devigne. I'm very glad to introduce them in each of the presentation that we are going to hold. And we do have two discussions, Eric Leiten and Peter Kostra. The first lecture will be held by Günter Vogt, and later the discussant will be Eric Leiten from TU Delft. Let me introduce the discussant first. Eric Leiten is Professor of Landscape Architecture at TU Delft. His professional expertise and skills have been developed through his position as independent special quality advisor for major public entities, responsible for the development and execution of large public work in the Netherlands. And for our speaker, there will no need for introduction. However, I will give a brief introduction as well for Günter Vogt. Since 2000, Günter Vogt has been the owner of Vogt Landscape Architect in Zurich, with branch offices in Berlin, London, and Paris. And since 2005, professor at ETH Zurich, emeritus since July 2022. From 2007 to 2011, he was director of the Network and City of Landscape. In 2010, he opened the Case Studio Vogt in Zurich. In 2002, he was a visiting professor at Harvard Graduate School of Design, and in the same year, he received the Prix Mérite Oppenheim from the Federal Office of Culture. In 2018, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of Liechtenstein. Thank you, Günter Vogt, for being with us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. So I don't want to start with that I disagree with you. I was in a jury yesterday in Hamburg where 10 landscape architects proposed a proposal for a very urban landscape and landscape as an urban model. Nobody used a section or a model. That's reality. And I will be very critical about our discipline. And I hope that we will have in the end a really good discussion about, because it's not interesting to show what we are doing and it's nice and it's prominent and whatever. So I would really like to discuss it as I did it when I was a student in a very critical way. So a landscape as a model or model as a landscape means that we are not really, and you had it in your introduction, a large model of our studio. So currently we have one from Hamburg where we do a transformation of a harbor in Hamburg into a new part of the Hamburg city. Very big project. And this model is about 9 meters long and 1.5 meter wide. And then the problem is that in the office you can do it, but with the students it's impossible because it's too expensive. They don't have enough space to work with models in this way. But for us, it's super important to discuss all design decisions in a model. And I think, especially coming back from yesterday's jury in Hamburg, it's all a bit too artificial. All the proposal, it's not relating to the urban situation, it's not relating to a landscape. And therefore, I think the discipline of landscape architecture should really much more relate to landscape. Here is an example, and I will show you some examples in the collaboration with artists. This is with Olafur Eliasson in Iceland, a very famous waterfall, where we did an interview in front of this waterfall and discussing what is your perception. So for him, it was just fantastic. For me, as an object, and for me, it was really interesting because I see a huge landscape behind such a waterfall, because to get so much water, you need a really big landscape in the background. And then we discussed, what do we see and what do we perceive? And that's completely different to, let's say, all this reference culture we have meanwhile everywhere. And what's really difficult in landscape architecture and in architecture as well, that all students and all my colleagues are referencing to an image, and it's not about, it's not really substantial. And therefore, what is the translation of this waterfall in Iceland? It's, of course, it's related to Robert Smithson, where he proposed to have a ship crossing the Hudson River and bringing the forest from outside into the city. And he brought the waterfall into the city, or 5 waterfalls into the city. So just to, if we are working in the public space, we should much more relate to the real landscape. What we did with the ETH studio in Basel with Hertzog de Meuron, Roger Diener and Marcel Meili, that they found out after 10 years of research that they did a portrait of Switzerland, urbanization of Switzerland. They found out after 10 years, they forgot the landscape. And that was a really interesting discussion then, Attention the Landscape, relating to a book of Lucius Burkhardt and Max Frisch, Attention Switzerland, where we found out that the real problem is that in architecture and urban planning, the landscape is completely forgotten. And I don't mean it as a critique on this architecture and urban planning disciplines. It's a problem of landscape architecture as well. So we are not present enough in this discussion. And what I would, no. So this is the first one. I'm only using as a professor reference images when I have seen the buildings, the landscape, whatever. And this is one example where I would like to explain. This is Le Corbusier. He really planned and designed Chandigarh. And what was for me very interesting, why is the Palace of Justice in Chandigarh so good? Normally you have this, you know, these horizontal layers of floors and so on. But on top, there are some organic, small-scale things like uplights and so on, what he is showing on the left-hand side. But this wasn't the really interesting things when I was in Chandigarh. The real interesting thing was this part just nearby, the Corbusier project, the so-called rock garden. The engineer by Corbusier built this garden very secret, and it was a bit illegal and so on. And what you see, it's a bricolage. So he used many things already used as an electrical device, and so On the top right, you see it was like a rock formation, but it's matras, matras were used to build these walls up. And it's a complete bricolage. So in difference to Corbusier, who was really an architect, engineering, it's really planned and it's in a grid. And so this is just the opposite nearby and very interesting. If you ever go to Chandigarh, you should really visit it. And then I have in my office these two people. So the group of the engineers and the group of bricolage. And then I have a third group, which I'm part of it. So using these two approaches, so it's half engineering and half bricolage, and or they decide to use this principle or the other principle. And bricolage means you just take what is on your table and you arrange it in a new way. And so these are two different approaches in terms of design. And I think that's very important. And then the model is becoming very important. And then I'm working, of course, with many different artists. This is two young artists, Julian Charrière and Julius von Bismarck. I met them when I organized a summer school with Olafur Eliasson, his artist students and my architectural students. And since then, I'm in contact with 6 or 7 of these art students. And what you see here, it's a landscape. No? In the background, by the way, you see the Utah National Park. And in front, you see an explosion. And it was for around 1 week in every news in the US. Is it possible to explode natural monuments? And it was a long discussion, and is it fake? Is it real? And Disney found out it's real somehow. And so, but in the end, Julien and Julius just wanted to have an interview with the with the New York Times about climate change, natural disasters, and so on. And in reality, it was built in the desert south of the US in Mexico. So they built it and exploded it. And now the question is, what is real? What is a model? And what is an idea? And what is the truth behind it? And that's, for me, very interesting. So we did this exhibition with Olafur, a very famous exhibition 20 years ago, where Olafur asked me, yeah, you know, I would like to work with you and for this exhibition in this famous museum of Peter Zumthor in Bregenz. And then asking, but what is it about and why do you ask me? We didn't know each other. Meanwhile, we are very close friends. So, and he told me, yeah, I would like to talk about gardens, parks, landscape, environment, whatever. And then I explained him, these are completely different things. If you are talking about the garden or landscape, that's not the same. So we had long discussions. And by the way, the right hand side image is showing the invitation card where everybody asked us, but why do you know a natural disaster like this flooding? And we explained in the public discussion, and I think that's very important, that we explain what we are doing in the public. And here his explanation was very easy. It's not a natural disaster, it's a cultural disaster, because we are closing the surface of the earth and the water is coming much faster, and therefore we have flooding. And so we did an exhibition with mushrooms in the ground floor. They were always stolen and covered by plastic to keep the humidity and so on. It was always stolen. And then I did an interview, and I think that's very important. If you do such things, we should always have a public discussions. And I explained these mushrooms are poisonous, but they were not really poisonous. They were stolen every day. And the people sitting just in front couldn't identify who has stolen these mushrooms. And I think, and in the first floor, it's a very simple thing. You know it especially from the Netherlands, where you have these channels with these floating plants on the first floor. I'm still grateful to the director of the museum that he allowed us to do so. We did an even more radical exhibition in the Bayer Museum last year. And then Ram the Earth. So just to, it was this proposal in the second floor was coming, and he wrote, Olafur wrote it in the text for the exhibition, a direct letter to Peter Zumthor. It's very difficult to show art in your museum. It's a beautiful museum. And I had to ask Günther, who is really working with architects. So, and he told me, don't show anything on the walls, don't show anything in the space, just use the floor. And the position where the photo is taken is 1 meter higher than the position of the person you see beyond. So, sorry. And then in the end, it's more about natural phenomena. And so earth, water channels, and here in the last floor, fog. People normally don't like it, but in a museum, it's really spectacular. But it's 25 years ago. Meanwhile, you have seen it many times. So it's it's really about how can we identify nature or landscape in an exhibition space. And this was the goal of it. And the next one is, again, an exhibition. What I criticize in the discipline of landscape architecture, so I have many students and coming to our office to do an internship, and they are all asking for, yeah, what about temporary landscape? This is really not the future of the discipline. I mean, you have temporary in terms of landscape or urban spaces or so. It's really not good. And yeah, but it is experimental and so, but if you really want to do experimental, do exhibitions together with other disciplines like urban planners or landscape architects or artists. I mean, urban spaces are not experimental. We have people expecting a certain quality, and therefore we are more interested to do exhibition. And here it was with SciArc in Los Angeles. They wanted to have an exhibition to show architectural projects, but to show the landscape as well. And so we did a very vast research about the Los Angeles River, how the water is coming to Los Angeles, and you see the SciArc University here, and here's the Los Angeles River. And on the right-hand side, how it is perceived in Hollywood films. And so we did a project to show the landscape behind these projects, and we wanted to show this, especially these water aspects. And as you can see here and here, what Violetta is showing, so the water flow in the plants, no? So that means every object, plants for example, are loudspeakers, and therefore we wanted to make it explicit that the water is present in the plants, in the environment, and to explain some aspects of the, and it's much more complicated, of course, with the salt and when you see all this reality, of this river, it's very strange. And then we wanted to show this reality, this real landscape as a model. And of course, we had to this on the right, on the low right, you have oil fields or lakes on you can find everywhere in Los Angeles. It's coming to the surface, no? And it's real oil. And then we wanted to show it and to mirror the projects of the architectural students and of course the plants where you could feel the water. So, but after an hour, we had to take out the oil. That's really strange. If you bring it into reality, this oil, it smells, of course, but it's dangerous, it's poisonous and so on. But you have it in your everyday life. So people didn't accept it. So that's an experience of when you do an exhibition, it's much more interesting than a temporary landscape. And of course, we filled up the floor with concrete from construction sites. And so you really had to control yourself when you were walking and to concentrate on the presentation. And it's about an urban situation, but in a very different way. When we are talking now about sections, I think sections are really in the discipline of architecture as well. They are out of fashion, but for me, sections are the most beautiful things in our discipline, landscape architecture and architecture. What I'm showing now, some slides of a private garden in this most spectacular position in Switzerland. Normally, we don't do private gardens. So you can see this leftover of the glacier times. You can see the Alps up to 4,500 meters. And this is a very spectacular situation when you stay there. And then we wanted to really make this genius loci very explicit. This is a planting, a Dutch colleague, by the way, did it. It's a model, a schematic model, how we do the planting for this garden. So where are the view axes and where are more atmospheric spaces? And then we proposed something, you see it here in the section, to see the subterranean landscape. That's normally not so spectacular, but we did a research before we did this, and we found this rock. This is a boulder from the glacier times. Doing this research before we started our design, and to find this boulder, a huge boulder underneath, and to make it present as a garden feature. And I have to go a bit faster. So to make it present, so this history of the landscape, and I mean, we are constantly talking about modern times, postmodern times, and postmodern times is always perceived as a, let's say, Roman, Greek, freestyle style in terms of design, but in reality, it's about time and space, and that's really interesting for us. So we did a kind of, let's say, a very historical type in Switzerland or in Zurich, especially the grotto, where we would keep this history and this boulder in a grotto. So, and the last one, it's a very special thing. It's about different vegetation. It's not about our climate zone. It's about Madagascar, an ecosystem whole, which is becoming, by the way, more and more important in landscape architecture. It's not only green facades and green roofs and so on, but the public space is more and more going into the building. And of course, vegetation is, of course, going into the building. And that's how it looks like. And that's, of course, I'm very critical, by the way, because it's very fast nature. This is half a year after the opening. It looks like nature, but it's not really nature. And of course, the climate, the rain, the fog. But when we are talking about models, if you take the forest of Madagascar, it's very boring. I did a research trip there. You have gray leaves on the bottom, but you don't really see, it's not beautiful. So we decided to use a forest, a European forest, Planterwald, middle forest, where the topic of sustainability of German forestry is coming from. So you only use as much as you need. So you have different ages of the trees, young one, middle age, and old one. And so because people in Europe really like this image of a forest. So we used this model of a forest to design this rainforest. And here it looks like we are taking forest away, but that's then 2 months later. And to create such a nature, the idea of a model is very important, because without the model, it's very difficult. It's just design, and design is not, as Lucius Burkhardt said, design is invisible. As ecology or sustainability are really not visible. And that's for us very important. And if you see this waterfall again, and this waterfall has to stop at nighttime because it's too loud for the neighbors. So this nature is too heavy. So that's really interesting for us, that we use a model and we are transforming it in a design. And this, when I had a seminar with Lucius Burkhardt, what does it mean design is invisible? It means very simple. You are a student in the old days, in the 80s, and Saturday morning, you have to go to the university, you have to finish your final presentation, you go down. It's raining, you buy your cigarettes in those days, you buy a newspaper and a fast coffee. But what is really important? So you're waiting for a bus. Is it more important that the bus station is a wonderful design, or how often the bus is coming? And of course, it's more important how often the bus is coming. But in the end, Lucius Burkhardt said, by the way, design the bus station in a very good way. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vogt, for this inspiring lecture. We'll have the first discussant, who is going to be Eric Leiten, and then we will open one question to the public. Let me introduce Eric. Eric is a professor of landscape architecture at TU Delft. His professional expertise and skills have been developed through his position as an independent spatial quality advisor for major public entities, responsible for the development and execution of large public works, province of Zuid-Holland, State Forestry Service, State Service for Water and Infrastructure, and National Rail. Thank you, Eric. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Laura. Günther, can you see us actually, or not really?
Yes, I see your portraits on top.
There's a camera over there, right. So, thank you very much for this introduction and this beautiful trip through model land. You took us from a rather, let's say, concrete interpretation of the added value of using models in sections to a more, let's say, artistic statement, actually. Your point is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that model making requires an idea, actually. And this idea can be developed in the far end, almost as a sort of a statement, and a statement leading to an artistic installation taken out of, let's say, the real urban or landscape context into a museum-like situation. So to what extent do you think model making is an artistic enterprise? Could you comment on that?
I mean, I'm socialized by architects, and especially from the ETH. I wouldn't say it's an artistic element. And I see it in my office. Let's say we start with a competition or a new project, and we start to build a model. And we really won competitions by doing models. And if there wasn't an idea in the beginning, I mean, I'm not a big boss designing it, and it's a famous designer and so on. It's always a discursive, it's always based on discussions. And then the model is really easy to change. So what do you mean? You mean it like this and like that? You need 5 to 10 seconds. It's very fast. And I know it's for students, it's very difficult because it's too expensive. They don't have enough space. But in our office, it's much more efficient when we discuss around the model. And there is not always an idea in the beginning. We start with the basic model, and then what could you imagine there? And then we start to discuss it. It's not that somebody has a basic idea. So we start the basic model, and then we discuss what could happen on this landscape.
To what extent is the fact that landscape is never static? It's always changing. It has a sort of transformative, essential condition. Does it block the efficiency of using models, or does it provide a specific sort of approach to model making? Do you think that is something that we have to investigate further?
Yes, definitely. That's a problem. I mean, and I'm not criticizing my young colleagues, because for them it's always a bit aesthetic. No, they propose a tree in a drawing or in a model, and it's always static. And that's a difference to architecture or urban planning.
Yes.
So the sky is very open for us. That means some trees will die, and one tree will grow faster than the other. It's much more dynamic, and that's very difficult to control, and it's very difficult to explain it to our disciplines of architecture and urban planner. It's not so static. We should really understand landscape as a process. So that means in the best case, we have projects where we are involved in the next 15, 20 years, where we discuss, okay, the process going in this direction, how do we react on it? And that's really the future for me. So that, for instance, I don't believe that we can have this traditional model of, so let's say we do a competition for a park, we win the competitions and we build it and so on. I mean, the society cannot afford this kind of parks in the future. So we will have, and I'm constantly asking myself, all my colleagues working only 60 or 80% because they have a life-work balance, what are they doing with the 1 or 2 days a week? They will do a kind of social work. So they will be engaged of natural preserved areas for public parks and so on. It will change. So we cannot design something and it will take over by the municipality and they will maintain it. The future will be that we have to create communities taking care of it, even for the public space. And then we have this constant ongoing discussion. Okay, it doesn't work. If you have a garden, you know it. It never works as you imagine. So it's not like a building. And we should really strengthen this difference between architecture and landscape. So it's not static. It's really a process.
You finalized your lecture with 2 examples of garden architecture done within, let's say, the context of your own office, your own consultancy. would you be inclined to say that garden architecture by itself could sort of be interpreted as a model for landscape architecture as a whole, as a more, let's say, regional approach? Could sort of the pars pro toto element of garden design and how that relates to model making? Could you reflect on that?
Yes. If you would have asked me this question 1 year ago, I would say, no, we are not doing private gardens. Private gardens are private. No, it's a private view. It's not a public view.
Right.
But currently we are working on an ontology of landscape by Lucius Burckhardt. That means he has, and it's his concept. It's not our concept. It's a written concept. We just have to finalize it. It takes a lot of time, 1.5 years. So where he is describing wilderness, island, what is the gardener saying? So 10 themes. And there, of course, he's coming to the garden. And then it's really interesting, and it's really related to our history. I mean, the private gardens, the French gardens, the English landscape garden, it's always the garden, however the scale is, the garden is always a reflection about our culture.
Right.
And this is really important. Personally, I'm not so interested in private garden, but I have to say, so we have a fifth office, not only this 4 office being mentioned, where we are doing, since I'm leaving the academic world, to do more research. And I really proposed after the ontology of the landscape, where we have all these what is the gardener saying, for instance, and Lucius Burckhardt is making reflections. What are the basic texts starting from the Bible until today? And it's quite a big book. But then I proposed as a next project Sørensen's book about 40 different, perhaps you know it, 40 different private gardens. So somebody is collecting iris or water lilies, whatever. How does such a garden look like? But this is a very private approach. I don't have anything against it, but we should never forget our basis. And then the garden, it can be a small garden, it can be an English landscape garden, whatever. It always reflects the public discussion. So, yes, for instance, all these bee meadows, you know, all these ecological things coming into the parks and the gardens. And so it's always a reflection of current discussions in the society. And we should never forget it.
I fully understand what you're mentioning. Is there any remark or observation in the room? They're all flabbergasted by your reasonings and your examples. Which one did you like most? Is there any preference among the audience? Which installation or example? Which one did you appreciate most? Or you don't have a strong preference?
I have a question.
You have a question, please.
Yes. Go ahead. I have so many, I don't know, really students in the audience. So yes, all the students are asking us, coming to our studios, for temporary gardens. I mean, this is for me just, and I know all universities in landscape architecture are doing projects in temporary gardens. Why are we not doing exhibitions? I mean, for instance, all the architects we are working together, they all have a problem to understand what is our discipline about. Shouldn't we not more show what we are doing? And then, therefore, I really showed these exhibitions. Shouldn't we not open this discussion to other disciplines instead of having temporary gardens and then, yeah, but you know, it's experimental, but it's not really experimental. Because an experimental can fail, no? So
yeah. I'm not sure what if you're referring to let's say temporary shows like Chaumont in France that has
no. No, the students are not doing a park or a plaza or whatever, a typical type in the discipline of landscape architecture. They are only interested in temporary installations.
Yeah.
But this is, for me, too close to art.
Yeah.
That's why are we not doing exhibitions to show what are we interested, what are we working around, and if you, what is a temporary garden? It's useless. No, a garden is you need time, you need somebody taking care of it, and so on and so on.
It's worth a visit in most cases, but then it's that.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. I understand what you're referring to. Let's get in touch about this issue. I'm personally also interested in, let's say, communicating about our profession and what it contributes to present-day challenges in urban development and landscape development. So I think there's already a rather strong connection between ETH and Delft. So let's take this up. I can't wait, actually. The clock is ticking. We're moving forward in the program. Let me just say thank you very much for this opening introduction. I'm giving the floor back to Laura.
Thank you again, Professor Vogt. Regarding the question that you were asking, actually, it's crucial also to work on the territorial scale. And somewhat, landscape architects have been forgotten on this role. And there has been, always in the discipline, a subdivision between the people who are working in the garden and the other people who are working on the territorial scale, and so landscape planning. And of course, that has to be joined because the open space is actually the driver which allows us to cross the scales. So really thank you, however, and hope to see you in person soon. And we will move and we will meet with students at 10:30 with a second lecture by